Week 6 of the college football season is here. I'm Mark Bergin, joined by WRAL Sports anchor and reporter Chris Lea. Chris, NC State's looking to regroup in Week 6. They got a tough task going up against another 4-1 team in the Florida State Seminoles. You were at the Clemson game last weekend, so Wolfpack trying to regroup in Week 6. They host the Seminoles. Just let's start. What was it like being at that atmosphere? Because it looked absolutely raucous on TV.
It was. It was probably the best atmosphere I've ever been a part of, and it made me realize that I've only really been to the 4 ACC schools here in North Carolina and then, other places, ECU, Appalachian State. Never really done a lot of college football out of the state. And so it showed me how big it really is and how bigger it can go, right? You always hear about how big the crowds are at Penn State, how big the crowds are other places. And so and seeing an entire town literally shut down for that game versus the next day going to a Carolina Panthers game to cover that. And, maybe 4 blocks away from Bank of America Stadium, there's people who don't even care about the game. We're just going on right now. Like that, just seeing the difference in that was just huge for me. So, it was great to see that atmosphere. It was cool to see what NC State did. It did feel like the game was a little bit too big for them at times. But the main takeaway I had from them from that game really was the fact that their offense still needs a lot of work. But then on defense, their defense before that game and the 4 games prior only allowed 5 red zone trips. And then in that game alone allowed 4, right? So you're almost doubling up on that. So against Florida State, they've already said that Florida State, they feel like in their words, has the best offense in the ACC. They're going to have to keep Jordan Travis and the rest of the Florida State offense out of the red zone. But we can't just put it on a defense. That offense has to step up. And Devin Leary's got to have a receiver he can count on to get down the field besides Thayer Thomas. And so that is, I think, going to be the main thing for NC State this weekend is really trying to get some receiver and their running game to really step up and to, start scoring more points against legit opponents.
See, you're in my mind now because during the Clemson game, I'm like, where the heck is Sumo? And that's the running back, Demi Sumo Karngbae. He only had 8 touches in that game.
They barely ran him. That was what we were thinking in the press box. Where's Sumo Karngbae? But they didn't really start running him until like the 3rd or 4th quarter. It was weird.
Now, I know that he left the previous week's game against UConn with an injury. So perhaps that's part of it. But the team's leading rusher, who in previous weeks, like in the Texas Tech game, I know Devin Leary gets a lot of the praise, and rightfully so. But it was Sumo who was moving, who was the real playmaker in that night game at home in Raleigh for NC State. So I'm like, where is he against Clemson? Again, only 8 touches. This is just my opinion. I think injuries certainly contribute to some of that. And so I'd like to see the Wolfpack get him involved in the offense. And if he's not able to go, they've got to find someone else who can tote the rock like him, because he's been, in my opinion, the Wolfpack's best offensive player through 5 games this season.
I agree with that. And one of the things Dave Doran said after the game was that I guess because of the way that the game was kind of being dictated at the line of scrimmage, they felt like Clemson forced them away from the run, that they had to throw the ball. That also is indicative of the fact that your offense isn't good enough to push other people around and to force the defense to take what you're going to give them. So that's something that I guess NC State needs to figure out. But yes, I would think a steady diet of Demi Sumo Karngbae should work. But then also, is it going to be Devin Carter? Is it going to be Lassane? Like, who's going to step up for NC State besides Thayer Thomas to start catching those balls and becoming a down the field threat for them?
Chris, what I wanted to ask you is what I noticed is Clemson's got a defensive line that reminds me of the 2018 team when they won the national championship. 2019 draft, they had 3 first-round picks along the defensive line. That's what I noticed. Not to say that this season's on par with the team that won the national championship, but Clemson is stout up front and specifically on the defensive line. Was there anything that stuck out to you that you might not notice on TV that you noticed physically being there last week at the game between Clemson and NC State?
not sure if this is on TV or not, but back when I was in the triad, I covered this guy by the name of KJ Henry, who was a basketball player and a football player. And now he, ends up being a football star, and he was a 4-star defensive end. Now he's at Clemson in his senior year. And, when I covered him in high school, he was, legit 6'5" at the time, but probably only 170 pounds. He's legit 250 or something right now, whatever he is, but he's still fast on that edge. And he was blowing up that offensive line. Like, that's where I felt like NC State really missed Emeka Emezi. I'm sorry. It missed Ikem Ekwonu, excuse me.
Yeah.
Being on that offensive line. And that was something that was, but they do miss Emeka Emezi too, as far as the wide receiver.
Yes.
Yes. But no, they really missed that. And so it was interesting to see just how fast KJ Henry was playing. And not that I wasn't used to it, but I was used to it at 6'5", 170, 185, 190 pounds. When he gets up to 250 and he still has that speed and he's, tossing guys around. And then he also is the vocal leader on that team, which he was, he was a leader before. He's more of a quiet guy, but he's like legit. You hear him. He's up front now. That was something that stood out to me. And it showed me it was cool to see somebody kind of grow up from a young, high school football star to now a legit man who has a chance to make the NFL.
Yeah, if I'm not mistaken, he's pretty high up on Mel Kiper's big board because they mentioned that during the game. And a lot of the players who could have gone pro said, no, we're going to come back for another year at Clemson. It's interesting to see, too, because Clemson typically has a stout defense. Brett Venables, now the head coach over at Oklahoma now. So they look pretty stout defensively. If Clemson goes on to the college football playoff, really it's the offense. And that was really the thing that hamstrung this team a year ago. And Clemson looked a lot better against NC State, but NC State's going to try to get right again against a Florida State team led by Mike Norvell this upcoming week. So we'll see. Both teams at 4-1 in the ACC should be a heck of a matchup on Saturday. I want to go and move on to your top game of the week, non-ACC, and you picked number 8 Tennessee at number 25 LSU. Make the case for why you had an eye on this game specifically.
Well, one thing you'll learn about me, Mark, and everybody out there, if you've had paid any attention to anything I've ever done at WRAL, I have a slant towards North Carolina. I love the state of North Carolina. So when I look at this game and I see how well Tennessee is doing, I want to see somebody by the name of Hendon Hook from Greensboro, North Carolina, whose dad, Alan Hook, is legit the best quarterback that ever played at North Carolina A&T ever in their history. He comes from a quarterback family. His little brother was a quarterback in high school as well. And I want to see Hendon Hook, just kind of light it up. On the road, this is going to be a tough atmosphere. They're going to be on the road in Baton Rouge at Tiger Stadium and showing that, what Tennessee can do. Maybe they can jump into the top 5. And that's what I'm really looking for. LSU typically usually has a pretty good team. They're looking really good this year, being at 4-1 and 2-0 in the SEC. So I'm looking forward to seeing what Hendon Hook does and see if he could raise the level of play for his team like he's done so far this season in some amazing games. And the fact that he's from North Carolina doesn't hurt as well.
Triple H, Hendon Hooker, Heisman, the Triple H, Chris, because
I love it.
If
I love it.
The Vols go 5-0, it'd be the first time they've gone 5-0 since the 2016 season. Josh Dobbs, who's in the league, was the quarterback back then. And then they've got the third Saturday in October against the Alabama Crimson Tide. So the narrative is already set. If the Vols do go on the road, beat the LSU Tigers, it's going to be a tough task. LSU 4-1, got tripped up in the first week by Florida State, but they've regrouped nicely in the first year with head coach Brian Kelly coming over from Notre Dame. I'm going to pick a different SEC matchup, though. I'm going Texas A&M and Alabama, and I expect Alabama to take care of business as a double-digit favorite. But sign me up for the beef between Jimbo Fisher and Nick Saban. Sign me up. And all off season long, they're going back and forth about the role NIL plays and signing recruit. There's some bad blood there. And remember, last season, Jimbo was the first Nick Saban assistant to beat him as well. So Texas A&M paid a boatload of money to bring in Jimbo to win games like this. A&M's been up and down this season because they lose last week to Mississippi State. They won 2 ranked games the 2 weeks before. So I don't know what to expect, but Jimbo Fisher knocking off Nick Saban and the Crimson Tide a year ago and the bad blood in the offseason. I got my popcorn ready, Chris.
No, that's definitely going to be one to watch, especially with the beef between the two coaches. But shout outs to North Carolina once again. You know that Nick Saban is going to pop in that Appalachian State tape. And what did Appalachian State show you? If you just control the line of scrimmage and if you control the pace of the game, there's not a lot that Texas A&M and their highly paid players can really do about it. So, they're a good team, no doubt. And they're going to be up for the Alabama game, and I expect them to play so much better than what he did against Appalachian State. However, if you control the pace of the game, which Alabama can do with their big guys up front and their running game, and we'll see what happens on defense and all that. I think Nick Saban doesn't have much to worry about in this game. But I've been wrong before. I could be wrong. Who knows? So, but I just think Nick Saban and Alabama are gonna have that one in the bag.
Not sure if Bryce Young is going to go yet with the shoulder injury that he sustained the week before against Arkansas. And I'll say this, the Alabama backup, and his name slips me right now, Chris, but I think he would be a starter at the vast majority of Power 5 teams, even as Alabama's backup. I liked what I saw from Bama's backup. So if Bryce Young's not able to go, it looks like Alabama's got a guy waiting in the wings who's very, very capable. And he bust off a long touchdown along with Jahmyr Gibbs, who we'll talk about here in just a second when we discuss the Heisman race, that helped control that game. And it looked like a blowout against Arkansas. That final score was not indicative of how close that game was, but Alabama's got some guys where you get them in open space, they can take one to the house on any given play. So Jahmyr Gibbs, the running back, had 2 70-plus yard touchdown runs. And I'll go ahead and transition there. I think that right now, and it's a safe pick because we know Alabama is going to perform. You could call it the college football playoffs. Some people call it the Alabama Invitational, but I think he's going to be there at the end of the season. And if Bryce Young's shoulder injury does keep him out for, say, this week or is a lingering problem, this is an Alabama team where you have receivers that have gone in the league in the first round for the last several seasons. It's been a historic run. So it's no surprise to me that the receiver group has fallen off a little bit because the Alabama receivers have been historically great and even better than some NFL teams, I would argue, the last few seasons. So that's why I like Gibbs at the running back position. Still a dark horse. I know they traditionally give it to quarterbacks. Last running back to win the Heisman, Derrick Henry, Alabama, 2015. Yeah. Gibbs is my pick right now. It's way too early, but that's the case I would make for him to win the Heisman.
Yeah. Well, I think I would go with, again, my North Carolina slant. I love the state of North Carolina, right? So, and this wasn't something that was really on my radar until, and I'm going to shout out Josh Graham. He's a host of a radio show in the Triad, a sports radio show in the Triad. He does afternoons there. And he was just like, do me a favor, go back and look at Lamar Jackson's Heisman year, stats, and look at Drake Maye's stats this year so far. And so I was like, okay, I'll do that. And I went and did that. I was like, holy crap, you're right. And in that year, you would never say that Louisville was the best team, right? And you mentioned it earlier. A lot of times this goes to somebody who's playing on the best team. But Lamar Jackson was just so great and so incredible. A lot of it was because of his running ability. But if you also look at, what he was doing throwing the ball and what he was responsible for, he looked amazing. So let's look at these stats really quick. And I pulled them up. Okay. He had 4,928 yards of total offense, right, in his Heisman year. Let's go over to the Drake Maye tab. Right now, he has 1,594 yards of total offense. You don't think there's 5 games or 7 games to go, he could potentially get that amount? I mean, he possibly could, right? And then if you look, I'm trying to find the rest of the stats for him for Lamar Jackson. I think I'm missing it, but it looked like he had 51 total touchdowns. Right now, Drake Maye has 19 passing touchdowns, 1 interception through, again, 5 games with 7 games left. Not saying he's going to exactly hit those marks, but he can get very close. And right now he's looking amazing for, University of North Carolina, and showing what he could do with his arm. Again, 19 touchdowns to 1 interception, a 90.6 QBR. And, if North Carolina was a ranked team, if North Carolina was in the SEC, if North Carolina was in the Big Ten, people nationally would be talking a little bit more about Drake Maye than what they are right now. But I think that's the fun part of it, right? Because North Carolina is having a quote-unquote down year. They have a real shot at going against Miami and boosting those numbers this weekend for Drake Maye. And so that's somebody that I think, maybe folks aren't talking about him right now, but as the season kind of goes along, as we get towards the end of the season, his name is going to be brought up. And if it's not this year, if he keeps doing this, it might be next year. But Drake Maye is looking like one of the best quarterbacks right now in the nation.
It was kind of a question mark going into the season because Sam Howell, who went off to the NFL as a 3-year starter, so Tar Heels didn't know what they were going to get. Quarterback hasn't been the issue. It's been the defense. And so you see the high point totals he put up, the Florida A&M game to open the season, 5 touchdowns. It reminded me of that game Lamar Jackson had. I think it was against Charlotte, his Heisman year, where he had like 8 touchdowns. But I look at what could potentially hamstring him when you go to, say, a few weeks later, the App State game where they put up 63 points, but the defense lost 40 points in the fourth quarter.
Yeah.
The case against Drake Maye has really nothing to do with Drake Maye. It has to do, your defense has to hold its end of the bargain as well. So he's played excellent football this season. And at least for he's a redshirt freshman. The Tar Heels look like they have their quarterback for years to come. And again, going into the season, taking over for Sam Howell, someone who's on an NFL roster, that was a real question mark going into the season. He's played outstanding football.
Well, Mark, I'll say this, though. You're right, redshirt freshman, but if he is continuing to play this good, though, through this year, through next year, he can leave after next year and take that NFL money. So, and I don't think that you can go that long without putting up those type of numbers without, the NFL coming to knock on your door to say, hey, you're a potential first-round pick. And if the Panthers are still in their slump and they're looking for a quarterback in 2 years, could be a match made in heaven. They already missed out on Sam Howell. Don't miss out on Drake Maye.
Hey, and they've got the NC State kid, Ike Ekwonu, who we previously mentioned, the first-round pick. So that would be hilarious because it's like, oh, is the NC State tackle actually gonna block for his UNC quarterback? You get some bad blood between the 2 ACC schools, the 2 rivals. I am kidding.
Yeah. Well, it'll be good. I mean, it'll be kind of cool. It probably will bring them closer together, actually, especially after what Drake Maye said about NC State students recently.
Yes. I'm just, listen, there are certain things we will move on. Lee Corso was sick last week. I wanted to see him pick NC State and to upset Clemson on the Game Day broadcast. He was under the weather, so we missed him last week. College Game Day is going to be in Lawrence, Kansas for the very first time for football. I'm very excited to see this broadcast, but let's go into the mind of Lee Corso. TCU, Kansas, 5-0. Who do you think Lee Corso is going to pick on the College Game Day broadcast on Saturday's pregame show?
Well, as I said to you before we started recording, it's hard for me to think about this because when I see the Lee Corso picks, it's never live. It's usually after the fact because I'm either working at the time or, just doing whatever. And so, right now I host a radio show from 10 to noon, so I never see it live. But from what I've seen from Lee Corso, what I think he would do, especially in this case, Kansas is a really good story right now. You can't help but to cheer for and go for Kansas, since it is traditionally a basketball school, and you're not ever going to think about them being a football powerhouse. And here they are sitting here at 5-0, looking really good as a legit team, number 19 in the country. Who would have ever thought that Kansas would have been considered for that? So I think Lee Corso is going to appease the home crowd and go with the Kansas Jayhawks.
I hate to agree with you because it doesn't make for great fodder or great conversation, but I will agree. I think he's going to become infatuated with the Jayhawk bird. Kansas, when they played Duke earlier this year, it was the first time Kansas was favored against a Power 5 team since 2009. It has been a long time. This has been like the worst Power 5 team in football up until this season. And I want to give a shout out to their quarterback, Jalen Daniels. California kid, he's playing extremely well this season and has the Jayhawks off to a 5-0 start. Chris, I should hate Kansas because I'm a Missouri grad myself, and Kansas and Missouri are huge rivals, border wars.
Yeah.
But I got to give credit where credit is due. And I think Corso is just going to look at the Jayhawk bird, become infatuated with it. And I'm very excited because I love when game day goes to places for the very first time. We saw it earlier this season at App State and how much the fans get into it in places that don't traditionally host game day. Should be a great atmosphere on Saturday. And I think Corso picks the Jayhawks during the pregame show.
Kansas is coming up in the world. Kentucky is coming up in the world in football. Yeah. Duke is having a good year. What is happening right now? All these basketball schools are taking over football.
Well, it's funny. When I moved here in February, Chris, everyone's like, oh, you're moving to North Carolina, basketball state. And I'll tell you what, been pretty good on the gridiron.
It's been a good football year.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Chris Lea, WRAL Sports anchor and reporter, also the host of the Culture State podcast as well. Anything else you want to plug before we sign off here?
Sure. If anybody wants to listen Saturday mornings, 10 to noon on 99.9 The Fan in Raleigh, or you can listen live on WRALSportsFan.com. Culture State Saturday, myself and Dennis Cox, we just kind of get you ready for the day of college football. Also look ahead to NFL, talk about the Panthers, and we have special guests. Sometimes we show up at special locations. We've been on Franklin Street recently. We've done a live show at East Carolina recently. And we have plans for a few more live shows on location. So during the football season, we'll be there at 10 to noon, right before you watch all the college football that you can watch for the day. So make sure you give us a listen.
Chris, I appreciate your time. I'm hanging on to my Chris Lea stock as well. Wish you all the best. Check out his coverage, WRAL Sports. I'll sign off for the both of us. For Chris Lea, I'm Mark Bergin. Thank you so much for watching and enjoy the Week 6 college football action.